Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting video, and wow, was this crazy. I found this dresser on Marketplace, and it was close to home, so I thought I'd give it a shot. The top looked rough, you can see it's got water stains there, so it was definitely a gamble, but everything worked out, otherwise I wouldn't have uploaded the video. Sometimes you gotta take a risk and have a little luck on your side. So let's get started. So this video is going to be a little bit longer than usual. I try to do the same thing every time when I get these dressers, but once in a while you get one where things are just different, and that's a nice way of putting this top. And you just got to do adjustments here and there to your system. But if you're running this as a business like I do, once you get a system in place, you want to maximize your efficiency, and you just want to do the same thing every time. So when you're looking at all my videos, they all kind of start the same way, where I'm just getting the drawers out and taking the old hardware off and taping over the original holes, because I'm going to reuse those instead of drilling new ones, and that's going to save me some time at the end. And while I'm on the topic of this being a full-time business, I'm not sure how many more videos I'm going to be able to upload in the near future, because we're getting towards the end of January and into February, and usually in February I like to start building up my inventory for March, and March kind of kicks off furniture season for me out in my area. And with that being full time, I don't know if I can do that and YouTube full time. So I still got to figure out how I'm going to do that. I enjoy doing these videos, and I've enjoyed talking with people here on YouTube, so it's definitely something I want to keep doing. I just have to figure out how I'm going to do two things full time. And for me, with my business, I do full sets during the year. So I'm just doing a single dresser for the video, but it's basically the same thing with a full set. If you have a chest and two nightstands that go with it, you would just do the exact same thing to them. So I'm just doing a simple dresser just for illustrative purposes. But during the week, during the summer, I'll be doing a full set every week, and those take a whole week to do. So it's just the whole doing the set, editing. It would just be a lot of work for one person. So once I figure that out, I will let you know. This won't be my last video. I know I've got one more dresser that I still have to do, and then I'm not sure if I can upload once a week. It might be once a month. I'm not sure yet. I'm probably going to have to hire somebody to take care of the video for me. But other than that, I've got some part-time guys that help me during the summer out there in the shop. So if I can maybe find someone else to do the editing, I can upload more videos over the summer. Otherwise, right now I'm just a one-man band, so I'm just trying to do what I can. Now that I got all that out of the way, we can get back to the video. And what I'm doing now is I'm just going to take off all of that old lacquer off the top. And the stripper that I use, it works pretty quick. It only takes 5 minutes or so. And half of that finish is worn off anyway, so I probably didn't need as much stripper as I used. So we're just getting the stripper on there, and we're going to use this chip brush to smear it around and cover that top evenly. And we're also going to get the side trim also. And the more stripping you do, the better, because that's less sanding on the second step of this. So you really want to reduce the amount of sanding you do, not only to save time, but you're also going to be dealing with veneer 90% of the time when you're staining these old dresser tops. Once in a while you get a solid wood one, but most of the time it's veneer, and you don't know how old that is. So if it's thin, then you really don't want to sand on it very much at all. And I already knew I had to sand a pretty decent amount because of the condition of this. Plus, with those dark water stains there, I don't use wood bleach or any other kind of bleach, so I kind of feel like it damages the wood in the long term, So I decided I'm just going to sand this as far as I can go, and hopefully it sands out. And you see those drips dripping off the edge of that trim. You definitely want to wipe those up because they will travel down the length of your dresser, and if you don't get them in time, that's going to eat away the finish on the sides, and then that's more sanding you have to do on the side to even that out. And here in a little bit, I will show you what those look like. But right now, I am just using a scraper. It's just a little putty knife, and I'm not pressing very hard at all on this dresser. This stuff's coming off very easily, and I'm pretty sure it's a little more stripper than I really needed. You can tell that it's really runny and really liquidy. If that had a normal amount of lacquer on the top, this would be more gummy than runny. So that's okay. It's good to overdo it on the stripper because if you use too little amount of stripper, it tends to dry out and then you have to apply a second coat anyway. So it's just better to go heavy on the first time. So now I'm just going to scrape this off into this dustpan, and then it goes into the trash. And I'm going to try to get as much off as I can so I'm not sanding it off later. And here I'm going to use a grout brush, and these are cheap. These are $3 or so at Home Depot, and these are not the metal tooth ones. These are the stiff plastic teeth. And I'm just going to scrape off the old finish off of this trim, and it's coming off really easily, which I'm very happy with. So that saves me sanding later. And I wasn't sure how this was going to go. Sometimes it's tougher to get the trim off for some reason, but this is coming off very quick and easy. Usually on the fronts, I don't apply enough stripper, and I usually have to sand these more. But even this is coming off pretty easy. So I'm guessing that when this dresser was first made, either the finish wasn't applied very thick, or it was, and it's just worn thin over the years. And I'm not sure how old this dresser is. I'm guessing this is probably, 1980s. That's just my guess, though. But still, if it was an 80s dresser, we're talking almost 40 years old. So, plus, you never know how it's been stored, in its whole life. There may have been times where it's been in a basement or out in a storage unit or a shed or something. So, there's just a lot of factors involved when you're dealing with these dressers, and you just don't know the history of them. But if I were to guess, I would think that the original lacquer coating on here just wasn't very thick at all, and then it was used a lot. So it's just two things combined that really wore out the top of this dresser. So I've been putting on the mineral spirits this whole time, and I'm going to wipe the entire dresser because you see these drips here on this one side of the trim. There's actually drips on both sides, and you have to wipe those up. This stripper, even though it dries to the touch, whatever the chemicals are inside it, they are still active, and they will continue to be active for I don't even know how long. But I've had dressers before where I was pretty much done, and I had my primer, my paint, my top coat, and there was a piece of that stripper, and it came off, and it took everything with it. And you don't want that to happen at your client's house. So it's better to wipe that off here at the shop before you sell it to somebody. So I just wipe the whole dresser down now because there's even spots that I can't see, and I'm just going to go ahead and wipe them anyway just to be safe because that stripper gets everywhere. And usually after I wipe down with mineral spirits, I'm pretty much done for the day on the dresser. I usually give it a day to dry. I'm sure you could get away with maybe waiting 3 or 4 hours, but most of the time I let it dry overnight and then I come back the next day to stain. And this is what it looks like now. You can see there is some cracking on the top here, but fortunately that particular one is not flexing, There is one that is flexing here in a second when I get to it. So this is actually a good sign, because if this was a cheap thin veneer, this whole thing would have been in way worse shape. So for this to have water damage and it's only got a couple of cracks and only one is flexing, that tells me this is probably a really good veneer, and it's pretty sturdy. So I had some hope that this was going to work out around this time. Now what I'm doing is I'm going to take some wood glue and I'm going to water it down a little bit, and I don't even know what the proper water amount is. I'm just going to thin this down because I want to put the glue down in those cracks on the veneer, but I don't want that glue to be thick and sit on the top because it'll get sanded off. I want it to be thin enough to go down into those cracks. And I've tried this before with super glue, and yeah, super glue, it dries really quick, and that's great and all, but a lot of times it dries too quick for me to get what I really want done with it. So I'm going to use this wood glue because it does take, a couple hours to dry, but it also gives me more working time so I can really get this where I want it to go. And there were some other cracks that I was starting to notice when I was doing this. They weren't very big and they weren't very noticeable, so I just decided to fill them in while I'm there. Fortunately, this entire top, despite how it looks, these were the only small blemishes as far as the condition of the veneer. And I was very happy to see that I only have to do a couple of these cracks here and not, way more. So now I'm going to wipe off the excess here. I feel confident that it's doing what I wanted it to do. I don't really need all this extra glue. I was just wanting the glue to go down into those cracks and fill those in. And, my plan was to put some weight on this and try to flatten those out and leave it overnight. And I was just kind of hoping this would work out. But I didn't really need all this extra glue here, so I'm just going to wipe this off and hope that this was a good idea. You never know. Half my ideas don't pan out, so I just go until something works. So I'm just going to weigh this down with some steel, and then I left this overnight. Now it's time for sanding, and I know a lot of people find sanding boring. I honestly don't mind it too bad. It's wrapping the drawers that is super boring for me, but it's something you gotta do, so I just gotta grind through it. But I was sanding this, and I looked at the original rings where the old hardware was, and I noticed that they are incredibly deep, and they're way too deep to sand out. And here I'm showing you why you want to get those out, because here's my new hardware, and you can easily see the original ring from the old hardware, and that would show through when you were done, and it would look, unfinished and just tacky. So I like to get those out, but that was way too much sanding. The only way to get those out would be to sand a divot into that spot, and then that would look weird too. So I'm just going to fill those in with Bondo. That's the best way forward, I think. When you're doing Bondo, it's best to do medium and small amounts at a time. If you try to do a big glob at once, it'll probably dry out before you even get halfway through with it. So you just want to use a small amount over and over, and you don't need much hardener either. So you saw how much hardener I used. That's about all you would need. And you've only got about 5 minutes to use this. I mean, once you mix the hardener with it, the clock is ticking, and you've got 5 minutes before it starts getting too rough to use. You want it to be pasty like this, and it doesn't last very long. So once we're done with this, we're going to set these aside, and probably in about 10-15 minutes they'll be ready to sand. So we're going to get to the other drawers, and they have trim around the edges, so I'm going to have to sand those a little different. I'm going to have to use my palm sander here, and this will pretty much knock off all of the original hardware marks on this drawer here. And I believe I'm using 120 on here. That's pretty much standard for me when I get my drawers, my dresser. I always start with 120, and then I go to 220. That's the only two grits I use. So I'm going to start with 120 here and hog off the material and smooth things out. And then I'm going to come back over it with 220 and just really, make it real smooth and close up the wood grain. Now, the best way that I have found to sand Bondo is to set your orbital sander directly on top of it and start it up and kind of smooth out the Bondo right away. And if you go the other way, if you start from the side and you try to come in from the side with your sander, it kind of acts like a saw blade, and it just chips away at your Bondo, and sometimes it'll pull the Bondo out of the hole that you're trying to fill. So I always smooth the Bondo out and then I sand it, normal. Now I have to refill my primer gun with the best primer on the market, in my opinion. So I just have my drawers spaced out like so, and I'm just going to do one medium coat of primer, and that's all I'm going to need. And I won't have to worry about bleed through, and I won't have to worry about adhesion. And this primer is pretty thin, and it goes through the gun pretty easy, so I really don't have to worry about this getting clogged up very often at all. And drawers with detail like this, you want to make sure that you're spraying straight down so you get all of that detail covered evenly. So it's the next morning, and it's 53 degrees, which is chilly, but I think it was like 18 or 19 outside, so 53 is not too bad. But at the moment, it's too cold to spray, so I'm going to go ahead and work on this top. And that glue has worked really well. Everything is flattened out, everything is held down, and I feel comfortable sanding and moving forward with this. So I'm going to start with the trim first, which is one rule of mine that I always follow. I do the trim first, because if you accidentally take your sandpaper and you ride it up on top of the dresser, or if you have your sander and it slips and it scratches the top, then you can go up there and sand. When you're sanding the top, you can take care of that at that time. But if you do the top first and you've already got everything pretty well done, and then if you do your sides and you end up scratching the top with your sandpaper or your sander or whatever, well, now you've got to sand the top again. And the more sanding on the top you do, the higher the risk of going through the veneer. So I do the sides first, then I work on the top. And the sides, I just used 220 on those because it was coming off very easily. So I don't have to do the sides again. I'm just going to work on this top now. Usually I will start with 120, and when I feel comfortable that everything's where I want it, then I'll move up to 220, and I'll just go over a couple passes with 220 just to make it a little bit smoother. That's normally what I do, but with this top in this condition, I wasn't sure how much veneer I had to work with. So I believe I am only using 220 at this point, and after a little while I realized that this veneer was actually holding up pretty well. So then I switched to 120 like normal. But if you always want to use 220 on your tops, that's perfectly fine. That's the safe way to go. It's better to use 220 and play it safe than to try to go a little bit faster and ruin your whole top. At this point, I didn't want to run my orbital sander anymore. I was not sure how much veneer I had left, so I really just wanted to concentrate the sandpaper in one spot, and there is a water spot right there that I'm trying to get out. And the rest of it came out pretty well, which I'm happy about. With the amount of sanding I did, I don't think a cheap veneer would have held up, so I really think this was a good quality veneer. And I did chip away at this while I was sanding, and once I saw this is what made me want to quit sanding, because I was starting to chew up the veneer a little bit in that one spot. I'm actually going to fill that in with sawdust that came off the top when I was sanding. So I'm going to mix some glue and sawdust and make my own wood filler with it. I like to do this because you're using the exact same wood to make your wood filler. A lot of the wood fillers that they sell in the store, it's very hard to get them to match up with the wood that you're working on. It's actually not that easy to get this wood filler just right. You want it pasty, but you don't want it too clumpy, so it's kind of hard to find that middle ground. And I had to keep adding glue and sawdust until I got the consistency I was looking for. The plan is to get that wood filler down into that void and fill that in. And I want to leave it a little bit proud, and I want to tap it down and try to pack it in as good as I can. And this takes a few hours to dry, so this isn't something that's going to happen right away. So you get this on there, and I put a fan directly on it to try to speed things up. So in the meantime, we can start painting these drawers, and this is a gray color, I believe. It looked gray when I picked it out, and once I got it in, on a dresser, certain lighting makes it look blue, and I don't know, that might be another debate in the comments, because this is supposed to be gray. I know the color, it's dove or pigeon or some bird, it's supposed to be gray, but it kind of looks blue. So, yeah. So it's another one of those. We like to do a lot of gray. Me and my wife, when we do our color schemes, we do a lot of gray and off-white because it sells really well in our area. And, if you want to do this as a business yourself, you really want to test your market and see what sells well. And certain things that sell in my market may not sell in yours, or vice versa. And when you have drawers that have trim like that, you need to hit them at all angles. So I'm just going to top off these final 3 here, and I do 2 coats of paint. So I'm actually going to come back and do another coat later after this. So it's 1 coat of primer, 2 coats of paint, 2 coats of lacquer on the sides, and then I do a 3rd coat of lacquer on the top. That's my process. And right now the glue is dry. I'm not sure how much later this was. I'm pretty sure it's the same day, probably later in the day. And so I'm going to use some 220, and I'm just going to use my hand sander here. I just want to focus the sanding right on that one spot. I don't want to hit anything else with the orbital. Now that that's done, I am going to hit this with some 220 just to do a final sand and make sure everything's smooth to the touch. I don't want anything uneven. I've already hit this with 220 before, but I'm just doing it again just because I feel like this veneer will hold up if I go a couple more passes with some 220 here. And when you sand, make sure you go with the wood grain, just because you really don't want to run the risk of any kind of scratches. That was a lot of work. I couldn't have said that better myself. Now we're finally getting to the good stuff. I'm going to start off with a wood conditioner, and this is very important. I have done this in the past without conditioner, and it's really risky. It's a 50-50 chance of your top turning out very good or not. Usually these tops are old, and you don't know how old. It could be 50 years old. And you don't know where they've been kept. They could have been really well taken care of, or maybe not. So with these variables, you don't really know what this top is going to do when you put stain on it. And a lot of times without conditioner, it turns out blotchy because you have dry spots in the wood that will soak up more stain than the other spots. And that's a problem you can't fix. You can't just keep adding stain because that one spot will keep getting darker than the rest. You want to eliminate that possibility altogether. So you want to use this conditioner and have those dry spots absorb that, so then your stain goes on even. That conditioner only takes about an hour to dry. So while that's drying, I'm going to move to spraying the top coat on these drawers. And I'm going to do 2 coats of lacquer on this. This is the first coat, and you want to spray these pretty thin. It's better to build thin coats than try to get one thick coat all at once. It usually doesn't go well. So you just want to do thin coats on top of each other, and the great thing about lacquer is each coat you spray reactivates the previous layers, and they all bond together as one coat. So now we're moving on to the staining, and I'm using this stain called briar smoke. And my plan was to have this dresser have a gray undertone, and I wanted it to be a little bit dark just in case things didn't work out on the top. I was going to try to mask any issues with having a darker top. And this briar smoke, it does give it a smoky gray undertone. And there's also some black spots on the top of that veneer, and I think that's natural because I've seen those in other wood that didn't have water damage. That's the plan anyway. Usually I have a plan in mind when I buy the dresser, and then halfway through working on it, usually the plan gets changed or modified in some way. So you really can't just go into this with, a single game plan. You have to have a plan B and a plan C, because you really don't know how this is going to go. I've worked on a lot of dressers, and usually they all throw some sort of wrinkle into the game plan, and you have to pivot, or you have to adjust to that. So my plan is for this to be a little bit darker with a gray undertone. And with this particular stain, this briar smoke, in my experience, you always need 2 coats to get the color you're looking for. One thing I do like about oil-based stains is with 1 coat you can really get a good rich color on it, and a lot of times I will just stain something once and I'm done. So really I could have stopped after 1 coat, but I usually like to go with at least 2 coats with this briar smoke. Now if I was using some of the other stains, I wouldn't. Even though that I only use varathane, some stains, they just penetrate deeper on 1 coat than others. So you just have to learn where you're going with this on when you're staining. I know that with this particular stain, whatever they mix into it to give it that gray color, it kind of makes the stain feel more greasy, and it's easy to smear it and leave streaks on your top. So this is one particular stain that I have to be extra careful with not to leave streaks. Ironically, this is the stain that I use the most with my business during the summer. This color sells extremely well, and I have like 2 or 3 cans of this at all times in my shop. And yeah, the ironic thing is it's the one stain that is the easiest to leave streaks if you're not careful. And another thing about oil-based stains is these veneers, they can only handle about 1 or 2 coats anyway, and then they're maxed out. Once you do your conditioner and a layer of stain, that veneer can only absorb so much. So you really want to get as much bang for your buck as you can, and you really want to use an oil-based stain so you can get as much color as you can in 1 coat, because after a second coat, I really don't see a lot difference after that. So at this point here, I'm going to strike off, and I am taking this rag and I tuck it between my fingers, and I'm going straight across 1 time, and that's it. That's the last thing I do on the top. And as I'm looking at it now, that color that I was going for is kind of working, because those 2 black spots on the top, they look more natural now. They look like they belong there. And this stain also tends to darken over time. So whatever color you see now, when you come back an hour or 2 later, it's usually a shade darker. So it's a little bit later. Actually, I think it's the next day. I see the sun shining in the window. So it's the next day, and I'm going to go ahead and put that second coat on. And I'm pretty much doing the exact same thing I did before. I'm going to get that on pretty thick and heavy. I like to do a healthy serving of pretty much everything I do. I pretty much overdo everything. So I've got a lot of stain on there, and I'm going to let it sit for a minute or 2, and right now I'm going to make sure it's evenly spread across. So I let it sit for a minute or 2, and now I'm going to wipe this off, and I'm going to use a dirty rag. And I like to use this dirty rag technique, and it kind of takes excess off, and it kind of massages some of that stain into the wood, and it's just another way to leave stain on a little bit longer. So I'm going to go ahead and use a dirty rag. Now I'm using a clean rag. I'm going to get off all the excess. And after this, I'm pretty much done. Like I said before, veneer, it's pretty much done after 2 coats of stain. So this is pretty much the color that I'm going to get. And if I wanted something darker, I could maybe try a really dark stain, and it might absorb some of that and darken it up a little bit. If you had like an ebony stain or something like that, it would probably absorb, a little bit of it and make it darker, but it's not going to absorb too much more. And I know if I did a 3rd coat of this briar smoke, you really wouldn't see a difference in the color from what you're seeing now. So I was pretty much done with this, so I'm going to go ahead and let it dry, and we're going to move on to covering the top. This is pretty simple. You're just going to get some 12-inch paper, you're going to cut 2 pieces, and we're going to start taping this on. And the trick is to take the paper and tuck it down into the tape, because you don't want that tape to touch the sides or the top of your dresser, because that's your fresh stain. And a lot of times that blue tape, if you leave it on for a couple days, when you peel it off, it'll leave sticky residue behind. So it's just best to not even have it touch your top or your sides. So just take your paper and tuck it down in there, and then just fold your paper and your tape like I'm doing here, and you want the tape to touch the paper. This process usually takes a little while, and so I'm speeding it up. I'm usually very slow and careful when I'm taping here, and I did a video where I show you what happens if your tape isn't where it needs to be, if it's hanging down too far onto your front and sides, what that looks like after you paint it. So that's another issue I don't want, is to have this dresser be done and then I see that I need to do some touch-ups. So I'm going to go ahead and get everything done right the first time. So I'm going really slow here, and I'm making sure that my tape is lined up where it needs to be, and I'm tucking the paper down into the tape. And now we just have to get tape on the back and the top, and now it's ready to go in the spray booth. So we got to get those drawers out first. Why, thank you, Jeannie. And now I'm going to get the dresser into the spray booth. And you want to make sure that you sand that with 220 all over. And I just use a hand sander usually to smooth things out before it gets into the spray booth. Didn't make it into editing because if I showed every little thing I did, this video would be 2-3 hours long. So just for the sake of time, I don't show you everything I do, but I do want to mention that you want to sand before you get in here and start doing your primer and paint. And I'm just going to do one pass down and one pass back up, and that is the medium coat I'm looking for. And there's a little spot right here where I had to sand, so there's a little bit of a crack there on the side, but it's fortunately not very deep, and I think it'll fill in with primer and paint. So now I'm going to primer the rest of the dresser, and you want to make sure that you get the insides also. And you're seeing what I'm doing there. I'm getting the insides. Just because when you get a dresser, you never know if those are going to show or not when you close the drawers. So now it's time to get the hardware out, and my wife picked all of this out, and I will provide a link to this in the description if you want to try these out yourself. So now it's time to unwrap these drawers, and we're going to go ahead and put this new hardware on and see what it looks like. And I have to drill out the Bondo also. Some of that Bondo went down into these holes, so I'm going to drill that out real quick. It's going to be pretty easy, and then we're going to attach the hardware. And I have knobs to attach, and I've got those pulls to attach. And the pulls that are here are actually 3 parts. You have to kind of assemble them. And they're a little tricky at first, but once you do the first one, you understand how they work. And I don't think we've ever used these pulls before, so if you have any feedback about them, let me know in the comments. So now it's time to spray the paint, and I do this exactly the same way as I do the primer and the lacquer. Pretty much just do one pass down and one pass back up, and that's one layer for me. And I have to move pretty quick because I water my paint down pretty thin, and if you hold your gun too long in one spot, or if you go too slow, you'll get a bunch of runs, and those are a pain. So you want to avoid those if you can. Alright, now I'm going to show you how I mix the lacquer. I've been saying I'm going to do it, and I never get around to it, so this time I am. But I'm using these guns from Harbor Freight, and they have these markings on the outside, and so I'm filling up my lacquer to the 400 milliliters, and I'm going to fill my lacquer thinner up to the 500 milliliters. So when you do the percentages, 400 is 80% of 500. So once we fill up to the 500 milliliters, it's 80% lacquer, 20% lacquer thinner. I like to go a little more lacquer thinner because in my area we have a lot of humidity, so I like to extend my drying time a little bit. So I usually mix mine to about a 75-25 mix, which is excellent. And what's great about lacquer is if you don't mix it correctly and your surface has that cloudy, milky look to it, then that means that you need more lacquer thinner. So you just add more lacquer thinner, and then you can spray another coat of lacquer on top of that, and it will reactivate the previous layer and allow that moisture to escape. They do sell Watco lacquer in a aerosol can, and if you ever try that and the surface that you spray has that milky, cloudy look to it, they do have a retarder you can buy, and I would do the Mohawk brand. That's the one I like. And basically that retarder you spray on, and it opens up that lacquer and allows the moisture to evaporate. Lacquer does smell extremely bad, so you have to do this in a well ventilated area. And this shop is detached from my house, and I've also got a big fan in here, and that's the only way I could do this. I have respiratory protection on, and I can still smell some of it through that. It's pretty strong. So I'm actually going to spray 3 coats on the top there. But at this point, we're done. We can finally wrap this thing up. So I'm going to take this out of the spray booth, pop the drawers in, and my wife is going to stage it because I'm not very good at that. My wife's at Hobby Lobby all the time, so she keeps up with what's cool and trendy nowadays. And she's a big fan of Joanna Gaines, so she keeps up with all of that also. She's the one that comes up with these concepts for the dressers, and I'm okay with that because that's less thinking I gotta do. And that's it for this one. Thanks for watching all the way to the end, and keep an eye out for the next one. Have a good one.